The immortal heart's mortality, year 475, day 93, and what she presumed was the 15th hour. Oh, how she longed to feel the cool, mist-laden breeze of the midnight forest on her face once more, to plunge her feet into a mountain stream under the starlit sky and feel the moss slipping between her toes. Yet, even if she could go back, there was nothing from that day she would alter. That day. She hadn't thought of it in what felt like centuries. That one pivotal moment had led her here. Shackles biting into her wrists and ankles, bruises that never quite faded, the incessant sound of dripping water, and stale bread just beyond her reach. She leaned her head back, staring at the stone ceiling above her. The blood of the pact is thicker than the water of the womb. She turned her head sharply away. Those words always haunted her. Her mind drifted once again to that fateful day. The villagers had dragged her toward the city's plaza, the mob jeering and shoving her toward judgment. Insults and accusations were flung like stones. Traitor, liar, faithless. She paid them no mind and marched with her head held high. In one corner of the crowd, her family stood. Her mother and father's faces were twisted in contempt, but her sister's eyes, they seemed to hold a flicker of sorrow. But it was the king's gaze that pierced her soul. Standing atop a dais, he watched her with a cold, merciless stare. A woman at his side unrolled a scroll and began to read aloud. "Do you deny the charges?" "I suppose that depends on which charges we're talking about," she said, her lips curling into a defiant smile. "Betraying your kin for the blood of another? I neither deny nor regret it. Then there remains only one path to redemption." She began to read the verse. "For crimes against your blood, the highest punishment befits, but all must have a chance. You too shall receive it. In a pool of light, a weary soul will appear. Feed it your bread, and you shall be restored to full power." Those were the words that sealed her fate, and so she had waited. Decades turned into centuries, her chains loosening but never fully giving way. 300 years passed, and still the weary soul had yet to arrive. She had only numbers, the rhythm of time, and words to keep her company. She had learned long ago that words were the most potent weapons of all. Swords can kill, but words linger, carving themselves deep into the soul. Words had brought her to this dank prison, words of condemnation from those she had betrayed everything for, and yet it was hope stirred by those same words that kept her alive, kept her waiting. She stared into the shadows, scanning the darkness for a glimpse of that promised light. There was something liberating about the dark. It stirred the demon within her, the dark spark of the magic she'd once wielded so effortlessly. But now, even her magic had waned, a pale echo of its former self. The iron chains dulled it to almost nothing, and yet the sensation of metal around her wrists was what drove her to wake each day. It was hope that drove her, hope that one day her savior would arrive, or perhaps he would come, see what she had become, and flee. "Please, let him run off after he takes the bread," she muttered, the first words she'd spoken in a year. "That thing reeks." She inhaled deeply, glancing once more around her prison. A cavern under the mountain, with jagged shelves of stone surrounding her. To her left, a crude stone table, the ancient hard loaf resting upon it. Before her stood a few trees, withered but inexplicably alive, thriving without sunlight or water. They were all that kept her from fading into nothingness. You see, she was no ordinary prisoner. She was a witch. And witches, they do not die, not unless they lose their purpose. Once that happens, they fade away, slowly dissolving into the wind. But she still had a purpose. She had waited. A sudden gust of wind shook the branches of the dead trees. Then, in a flash of blinding light, a creature appeared, a being with shimmering wings crumpled and struggling for breath. "Help, please," it gasped. She lifted her head, her mind racing to recall the prophecy pool of light. "What do you need?" she rasped. "Who are you?" The creature croaked, still hunched over. "Are you a needy creature?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Something to eat? Anything, in the name of the heavens!" it cried. She cast a glance toward the table. "Would moldy bread do?" "I would eat anything right now," it whimpered. "I can't reach it. Can you move?" The creature attempted to stand, but its legs gave out beneath it. She sighed. "Don't die on me. I don't want to wait another 3 centuries for the next one." She pulled at her chains, straining against the iron links. The magic within her flickered weakly, but she was determined. She yanked with all her might, summoning what remained of her strength. until, finally, another section of the chain gave way. 10 more links snapped, and she stumbled forward, free at last. With a triumphant cry, she grabbed the loaf and handed it to the creature. I give thee this grain to pledge myself free from these chains. I give thee this grain as a token to the living, she recited. Thank you, witch. This act of kindness is... He began, but she cut him off. Enough gratitude. Eat. The moment the bread touched his lips, a jolt surged through the air. She felt the vibration in the chains as the magic trapped within them rushed back into her. Red lightning crackled at her fingertips as the chains exploded into dust. She gazed down at her hands, flexing her fingers. Her feet were free. Her knees, bruised from years of kneeling, no longer ached. She rose slowly, her posture regale, her magic coiling around her like a serpent. I am Nerida, she said, her voice resonant with power, and I shall never bow again. The long wait was over. The world would soon remember her wrath. Hostile horror. This story is based on an eerie incident that took place in a remote university hostel on the infamous date of Friday the 13th. At 6:25 p.m., Ella's phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from her friend, Chris, who lived in the nearby boys' hostel. Chris asked if she could bring over her project notes. She agreed without hesitation. At 6:30 p.m., Ella mentioned to her roommate, Tara, that she was heading to the boys' hostel to drop off the notes for Chris. She promised to be back in 10 minutes. At 7 p.m., Tara became worried. Ella hadn't returned. She called Nick, one of their mutual friends, and filled him in on what had happened. She explained that she and some other girls had already searched their own hostel for Ella, but found nothing. The attendance check was scheduled for 8 p.m., leaving Nick with less than an hour to find Ella. Tara asked him to keep the search quiet to avoid creating a panic among the students. Nick jumped into action. At 7:05 p.m., Nick went straight to the university's main gate. He asked the guard if any girl had left the campus recently. The guard shook his head, saying no one had passed through. Nick felt a sense of dread. Ella was still on campus, but where? The guard also mentions something odd. Another security officer who had gone into the campus about 15 minutes earlier hadn't come back yet. At 7:10 p.m., Nick returned to the boys' hostel and gathered a group of 5 friends: Alex, Rohan, Dev, Ryan, and himself. He explained the situation, assigning each one a different area of the campus to search. At 7:15 p.m., Alex took the elevator up to the rooftop, thinking Ella might be there. Midway up, the elevator suddenly stopped and the lights went out. Alex's phone flashlight flickered as the air became stuffy. He banged on the door, shouting for help, but no one answered. His muffled screams were the only sound in the silent hallway outside. The camera lingered on the closed lift door. A creeping realization set in. Alex wasn't getting out. At 7:20 p.m., Rohan was scouring the grassy courtyard behind the library, twirling a keychain nervously between his fingers. He suddenly heard hurried footsteps behind him. He whipped around. No one was there. A few moments later, a car's headlights flashed in his direction, illuminating his startled face. The keychain slipped from his hand, hitting the ground with a metallic clang. There was no time for Rohan to react. The sound of screeching tires was followed by silence. At 7:30 p.m., Dev combed through the boys' hostel, checking every room without alarming his fellow students. As he passed by room 13, the old sports storage room, he heard Ella's voice, faint but unmistakable. He opened the door and found no one. As he was about to leave, the door slammed shut behind him. A ball rolled across the floor, and before he could react, a heavy object crashed down. The scene faded out as Dev's fate was sealed. At 7:45 p.m., Ryan was climbing the stairs when he noticed a dark shadow moving in the corner of his eye. He turned around to see Nick standing behind him. "Man, you scared the hell out of me," Ryan chuckled nervously. His phone rang, and to his surprise, it was Nick calling him. He answered, and Nick's voice on the line said, "I just found Alex dead in the elevator." Ryan's face went pale as he looked around. Nick was gone. Panic-stricken, he turned to run, but his foot slipped. The echo of his fall reverberated through the stairwell. Nick, hearing the sound of Ryan's fall through the phone, felt his pulse quicken. Something was terribly wrong. He rushed back to his room to grab his bike keys, intending to get help from the campus security office. As he stepped inside, the wall clock caught his eye. 6:26 p.m. He frowned. The clock must have stopped. He checked his wristwatch and his blood ran cold. It too read 6:26 p.m. Time had reset. Panicking, Nick raced to Chris's room. He burst through the door to find Chris, Alex, Rohan, Dev, and Ryan all alive, sitting casually as though nothing had happened. Chris was still on the phone with Ella, arranging to collect the project notes. Nick quickly told Chris not to have Ella leave the girls' hostel, offering to bring the notes himself. Chris agreed, and Ella remained safe. Relieved, Nick left Chris's room, feeling victorious. He had completed his mission. But as he descended the stairs, he overheard a group of boys talking in hushed tones. "Have you heard? Nick's been missing for hours." Nick froze in his tracks, a shiver running down his spine. The screen faded to black. Midnight scream. It was Halloween night in the swamps of Louisiana, my favorite night of the year. I was excitedly donning my costume, a pastel blue dress with a sweetheart neckline. The dress was adorned with a silver sash that wound from a glittery black belt around my waist, over my left shoulder, and tied elegantly at my back. My shoes sparkled with tiny sapphires, and my dark, wavy hair cascaded down my back in loose curls. As I admired myself in the tall, antique mirror, I felt like a princess from a fairy tale. "Rachel, you'd better hurry or there won't be any candy left," my mom called from the hallway. "I'm coming, Mom," I replied, trying to hide my excitement as I grabbed my shimmering navy blue backpack. I also took my sequined candy bag. Its rough texture against my fingers contrasted with its dazzling appearance. I couldn't help but smile as I played with its sparkly surface. Just then, Mom entered the room, her face flushed with a mix of impatience and pride. "I'd better get going," I said, rushing out the door with a final glance in the mirror. The neighborhood was alive with Halloween spirit. Each house was festooned with glowing orange lights and adorned with fake, creepy cobwebs that glistened in the dark. As I made my way from house to house, my candy bag quickly filled with treats: Snickers, Skittles, Reese's Cups, and more. While walking, I spotted a group of 4 children sitting on the curb. They looked disheveled, with ragged clothes and a faint, unpleasant odor clinging to them. My heart ached at the sight. I can't just leave them here, I thought. I took a generous handful of candy from my bag, chocolates, gummies, and soda cans, and walked over to the children. "Here you go," I offered, extending the sweets towards them. "But we can't take these. They're your treats," murmured a timid girl among them, her gaze fixed on the ground. Her pale face was devoid of expression, yet her eyes conveyed a deep hunger. "I'm giving them to you," I insisted. "You need them more than I do." A wide, grateful smile spread across her face, revealing uneven teeth. "Oh, thank you," she said warmly. "I'm Marin," she introduced herself. "It's nice to meet you, Marin. I'm Rachel," I said with a friendly wave before turning to continue my trick-or-treating. After visiting a few more houses, my candy bag was nearly overflowing. As I was about to head home, I noticed a strange flicker of light coming from the edge of the nearby forest. It seemed out of place against the Halloween decorations, and an unsettling curiosity tugged at me. My feet were sore from the heels, and my blisters made walking a challenge. I remembered the spare pair of shoes I'd packed, simple black flats. I switched into them and headed towards the light. The forest was enveloped in shadows, the canopy of orange and red leaves obscuring most of the night sky, with only the faint glow of the full moon peeking through. I followed the light until I reached a small clearing. There, in the center, stood an old, dilapidated cabin. But what caught my eye was the enormous metallic disc hovering above the cabin. The saucer was massive, its surface glinting under the moonlight, and the glass window at the front reflected the eerie light. My heart raced, and sweat beaded on my forehead. Suddenly, a beam of light descended from the saucer, and I saw 2 figures descending with it. I quickly ducked behind a nearby tree. The figures were unmistakably alien. 2 girls dressed in matching green uniforms emblazoned with the word Oblivion in crimson letters. Their dark jeans and blood-red shoes seemed unnervingly out of place. As they turned, I noticed their eyes were entirely black, devoid of any white or iris. They stared blankly into the night, and an icy shiver ran down my spine. "What are they doing here?" I whispered to myself, barely able to suppress my fear. The girls moved with a strange, jerky rhythm, their gaze scanning the surroundings. I had to stay hidden, but the growing sense of dread made my hands tremble. I realized I had to make a decision, stay hidden and risk being discovered, or try to get away and find help. My mind raced as I weighed the options. The forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows dancing ominously with the movements of the alien figures. Mystic woods. Kavya ventured into the shadowy depths of the Whispering Forest, a place she was warned about but couldn't resist exploring. With a youthful sparkle in her emerald eyes and tousled auburn hair falling freely over her shoulders, the 5-year-old was a picture of innocent curiosity. Her mother had explicitly instructed her to stay close while she collected firewood. Yet, captivated by an enchanting melody that drifted through the trees, Kavya wandered deeper into the woods, drawn by the mesmerizing tune. As Kavya moved closer, the music grew more intense, creating a strange allure that seemed almost magical. But then, the snap of a twig beneath her tiny feet jolted her back to reality. Her heart raced as she looked ahead, her eyes widening in terror. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed, overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of eerie sounds, screams, screeches, and whispers that filled the night. She clapped her hands over her ears, trying to block out the cacophony as darkness enveloped her. The fateful night for the Sharma sisters began with what they thought would be an adventure, a camping trip in the Whispering Forest. The children from the local orphanage had always dismissed the chilling tales shared by the townsfolk as mere superstition. The disappearances that plagued the forest were seen as fabrications, designed to scare them. The matron's warnings about wandering into the woods after dark were often met with scoffs and disbelief. The sisters, daring and defiant, decided to prove the stories wrong during a game that had them camp out in the most foreboding part of town. "Ghosts are just stories," insisted Jake, one of the older boys, his bravado soon proven to be dreadfully misplaced. "Kavya!" Tanisha's voice pierced the stillness, filled with panic and desperation. The 16-year-old, with her piercing blue eyes and dark skin glowing under the moonlight, scoured the perimeter of the clearing where they had set up camp. Her heart pounded as she reassured herself that Kavya couldn't have wandered too far. Tanisha, determined to find her sister, muttered, "She must be around here somewhere." The familiar, comforting hills of daylight had transformed into foreboding giants by night. Paths that were once clear now lay obscured in impenetrable darkness, with only the pale moonlight providing faint illumination. The trees, once majestic under the sun, loomed ominously over Tanisha as she stepped cautiously into the unknown. Despite her resolve, a cold shiver ran down her spine as she ventured further into the forest, the air growing colder with each step. She strained her ears for any sign of Kavya, but was met with only the eerie silence and her own echoing voice. Leaning against a gnarled oak, its sap oozing like the venom of a mythical beast, Tanisha winced as it burned her hand. The haunting notion of the woods being more than just an old tale began to sink in. She buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the fear of losing the only family she had left. Since their parents had vanished and they were placed in St. Clair's orphanage, Kavya had been her anchor, her innocent, pure-hearted sister who brought light into her darkened world. Her breath quickened as she wrapped her arms around herself, struggling to fend off the wave of helplessness and fear that threatened to engulf her. As night fully descended, she darted behind a massive cedar tree, her heart hammering against her ribcage. The darkness now enveloped the forest entirely, the only sound the rustling of leaves and her own anxious breaths. Pressing her face against the rough bark, Tanisha tried to steady herself, hoping to blend into the tree's ancient strength. The forest seemed alive, its silence more oppressive than the cacophony of earlier. Tanisha knew she had to stay focused, for Kavya's safety depended on her perseverance. The forest, with its whispering leaves and shadowy figures, seemed almost to breathe along with her, each creak and rustle a reminder of the supernatural forces lurking just out of sight. Tanisha's resolve hardened as she braced herself against the cold, determined to find Kavya before the night claimed any more of their hope. A stalker. It was 10 p.m. on a cold autumn night in Pune. Mira had just wrapped up a crucial meeting that had gone better than expected. Her colleagues at the new marketing firm were eager to celebrate the success, but she politely declined their invitation to join them for drinks. She wasn't much of a party person and preferred to head home. However, finding a cab was proving difficult. After waiting a few minutes with no luck, she decided to walk. Her apartment was only a 20-minute walk away. It had only been a few months since Mira had moved to Pune from Bhopal. Her parents weren't entirely thrilled about her relocation, worried about her being alone in a big, unfamiliar city, but Mira had been determined to carve out her own path. Landing a good job at a respected firm with decent pay was a huge step toward her dream, so she was ready to take on the challenges of living in a new place. As she walked along the mostly empty street, the crisp breeze made her shiver. Mira was moving quickly, her eyes scanning for any sign of a passing cab. Suddenly, she felt a twinge of unease. It was subtle at first, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. She had the distinct feeling that someone was following her. Not daring to glance over her shoulder, she picked up her pace. The sensation didn't fade. Her follower, whoever they were, seemed to match her pace. Though she strained to hear footsteps, all she could make out was the rapid rhythm of her own. Her heart raced. She debated whether to turn around and confront the person, but fear held her back. What if it was worse than she imagined? In a moment of desperation, Mira veered off the main street and ducked into a dark, narrow alleyway. Her pulse quickened as she sprinted through the shadowy passage, the alley's darkness amplifying her dread. The walls of the alley loomed tall and oppressive, but after a few tense moments, the silence reassured her. She glanced behind her. There was no one. Relief washed over her, and she allowed herself a small, shaky smile. Reaching the other end of the alley, Mira emerged back onto a main road, feeling a sense of temporary security. Only 10 more minutes, she told herself, trying to calm her nerves. She was almost home, but then she felt it again, that cold wave of dread. She looked ahead and saw a figure in the distance, tall and shadowy, keeping pace with her once more. Her throat went dry. This time, Mira's fear turned to pure terror. She couldn't tell who it was or why they were following her. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could it be someone from work, a secret admirer with ill intentions, or perhaps something far worse, someone dangerous? Her imagination ran wild as panic gripped her. Run! Her body made the decision for her. She sprinted with all her might, her breath turning into shallow gasps, her feet pounding against the pavement. Her thoughts flashed through her mind like snapshots. Her parents' worried faces when she'd left for Pune, the struggles of her first day at work, the new friends she'd made, and now, this nameless, faceless terror closing in behind her. Mira's lungs burned with exertion, but she couldn't stop. Her apartment building was finally in sight, just a few hundred meters away. She silently prayed that the security guards would still be at the gate. She needed to see them, needed to know that someone was there. She burst through the gate and saw the guards standing at their posts. Their puzzled expressions followed her as she raced past. "Madam, is everything all right?" one of them called out. "No," she shouted between ragged breaths, her voice breaking. She didn't stop to explain, nor did she wait for the elevator. She darted to the stairs, bounding up the steps 2 at a time. By the time she reached the 4th floor, Mira's legs felt like jelly. She fumbled with her keys, her trembling hands struggling to find the right one. After 3 frustrating attempts, she finally unlocked the door and slammed it shut behind her. She collapsed against the door, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of fear and relief overwhelming her. She lay on the cold floor, utterly exhausted. The darkness of her apartment felt strangely comforting after the harrowing journey home. Just as she began to calm down, her phone rang. Startled, she fished it out of her pocket, her hands still shaking. It was one of her colleagues. "Did you make it home safely?" came the casual question from the other end. Mira's mind went blank, her body too overwhelmed to respond. She dropped the phone and collapsed into unconsciousness. Sometimes one's own fears and imagination can be the cruelest of stalkers, lurking in the dark, waiting for the right moment to pounce. The black magic. Ravi, a 17-year-old boy in his final year of high school, lived with his family in a scenic hill station called Darjeeling. The air was always crisp, and the views of the towering Himalayas never failed to inspire awe. It was the start of summer vacation, and Ravi's family decided to visit their ancestral village, Bhojpur, for the holidays. The village, tucked amidst lush green fields with serene lakes and ancient temples, was a peaceful escape from the bustling hill station. Ravi was thrilled to be there. His relatives welcomed him with warmth, and soon he fell into a routine of exploring the village and playing with the local children. Every afternoon, he and his friends would gather to play cricket in the fields. However, his parents often warned him to return before sunset. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about an eerie family that lived on the outskirts, a family suspected of practicing black magic. Strange things happened in the village, and children had gone missing over the years, vanishing without a trace. Despite these warnings, Ravi often stayed out later than advised, dismissing the superstitions as mere village folklore. One evening, excited about the prospect of a big cricket match, Ravi visited his friend Kunal's house. "Kunal, let's gather the others and have a match before it gets dark," he urged. Kunal agreed, and the two went around inviting other boys to join them. As the evening wore on, they played under the fading light, but Ravi seemed different that day, more aggressive, more reckless. He swung his bat with unusual force, hitting the ball far too hard, even injuring a few of his friends by accident. The sun dipped behind the hills, and a chill crept into the air. Realizing how late it had become, they all decided to head home. But as the sky darkened and the village fell silent, the parents of the children grew anxious. Their children had not returned home, and a sense of unease spread through the village. One by one, the parents gathered at the house of the village elder, the Sarpanch, voicing their concerns. "Where could they be? It's getting dark, and the boys should have been home by now," one of the mothers cried, her face pale with worry. The Sarpanch listened intently, his expression grave. He sent word for Ravi, the only boy who had returned home. When Ravi arrived at the Sarpanch's house, his heart sank at the sight of the anxious crowd. "Ravi," the Sarpanch began sternly, "you were the one who invited the other boys to play today. You came back safely, but none of the others have returned. Where are they?" Ravi, stunned and confused, replied, "I didn't go to anyone's house today, Sarpanch Sahib. I don't know where they are." The Sarpanch's eyes widened, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is bad, Ravi. The family we fear must have used black magic to trick you into thinking you invited the children. They've likely taken the boys." His voice grew louder as he turned to the villagers. "We must act fast. We know where to find them." Without wasting any time, the Sarpanch led the villagers toward the house of the feared family, a dilapidated old mansion that sat near the river on the outskirts of Bhojpur. The place was eerily quiet, its windows dark and its door locked. "They're performing the ritual near the river," one of the neighbors informed the Sarpanch. Everyone rushed to the riverbank, and what they saw left them horrified. A large circle of fire surrounded an unconscious Kunal, his limp body lying at the center of the ritual. The head of the sinister family, a frail old man with wild eyes and a wicked smile, stood nearby, chanting dark incantations as flames danced around him. His gnarled fingers moved rhythmically as he prepared to complete the ritual. "You vile creature!" the Sarpanch shouted, stepping forward with rage burning in his eyes. "You are a curse upon this village, and today your evil ends." The old man let out a bone-chilling laugh, his voice echoing through the trees. "Fools, you are too late. I have taken 99 children from this village. This boy will be the 100th, and with his blood, I shall live forever. No one can stop me now." The villagers gasped in horror, realizing the extent of the evil before them. The Sarpanch, however, remained calm. He knew that black magic had its limits. Interrupting the ritual could reverse its effects, turning the magic against the one who performed it. "We must act quickly," the Sarpanch whispered to the villagers. "Pour water on the fire. If we can extinguish it before the ritual is complete, we can save Kunal." The villagers worked together, fetching water from the river and throwing it onto the circle of fire. As the flames sizzled and died, the ritual was abruptly halted. A high-pitched scream pierced the air as the dark magic began to unravel. Suddenly, from the dying embers of the fire, a burning skull emerged, glowing with a malevolent energy. It hovered in the air for a moment before lunging at the old man and his family. The dark forces they had summoned turned against them, consuming them in a fiery blaze. One by one, the members of the evil family were devoured by the skull, their twisted cries echoing through the night. As the flames engulfed them, the Sarpanch turned to the villagers. See now with your own eyes how those who embrace evil magic ultimately fall victim to it. They sought immortality, but instead they have met their end. Once the evil family was gone, the villagers hurried to free Kunal from the ritual circle. He was unconscious but alive, saved just in time. In the days that followed, the villagers burned down the cursed mansion, its ashes scattered in the river to purify the land. The village priest performed a sacred yagna at the site, ensuring that no dark forces would ever return. Peace was restored to Bhojpur, and its people were free from the terror of black magic. And as for Ravi, he learned never to underestimate the dangers of things unseen, and the village resumed its calm, idyllic life, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. It was a crisp Monday morning when Maya was woken up by a soft melody. The familiar sound of a birthday tune floated in the air, and she instantly remembered. It was her birthday. Her heart fluttered with excitement as she threw off the covers and hopped out of bed. "Happy birthday to me," she whispered, a big smile on her face as she reached for the rose water spray she used every morning. Spritzing it lightly, the cool mist refreshed her, and she stretched her arms high above her head, feeling like she could touch the sky. As she wandered around her room, her phone chimed with a recording. "Happy birthday to you, Maya." Happy birthday to Maya." The familiar tune made her giggle, her dimples appearing as her face lit up with joy. Eager to see what surprises awaited her downstairs, Maya ran to the kitchen, where her mom was waiting with a warm smile. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," her mom said, hugging her tightly. "Thanks, Mom. I love you so much." Maya beamed, but her mom's smile faded slightly and she spoke in a more serious tone. "Maya, remember how you always wondered why I have blonde hair? Your dad has black, but you have brown?" her mom asked gently. Maya nodded, curious. "Well, there's a reason for that. In our family, on your 13th birthday, your hair changes to a color that reflects your personality. Tonight's the night you'll find out your true color," her mom explained. Maya's eyes widened. "Oh my gosh, I can't wait," she squealed with excitement. After enjoying her birthday waffles, Maya dressed in her favorite outfit for school, her pink striped tank top and matching miniskirt, topped off with a cozy winter coat. She completed her look with a beach wave hairstyle and a choker, feeling like she was ready to take on the world. "Happy birthday, Maya!" her friends shouted as soon as she arrived at school. "Thank you, guys," she replied, giggling. After a bit of birthday chatter, she headed off to class. In her first period, her teacher stood in front of the class with a mysterious look on her face. "Today, we're discussing something unique. Your hair colors. Some of you may have already experienced the change, while others will soon," she said. The class listened eagerly as the teacher continued. "Each hair color reflects a part of your personality. Green means you're kind and independent. Blue symbolizes intelligence and strength. Blonde reflects charm and creativity, and white signifies a special gift of understanding others' thoughts. As for colors like silver, rainbow, or pink, they remain unexplained and rare." Maya's mind wandered as the teacher spoke. What color would she get? Would it be something normal, or would she be one of the rare ones? After school, Maya couldn't stop thinking about her hair. "No matter what color I get, I'll accept it," she whispered to herself. That evening, she danced around her room, waiting for the moment her transformation would happen. Just before bed, her mom entered her room with a small vial of liquid. "Honey, drink this. It's something that was saved from when you were born. It'll help activate your hair's transformation," her mom said, handing her the vial. Maya scrunched up her face but drank the liquid anyway. "Ew, that's so sour," she complained as she crawled under the covers. Within minutes, she was fast asleep. Hours later, Maya awoke suddenly. Her heart was pounding as she jumped out of bed and rushed to the mirror. "This is it," she whispered, closing her eyes before daring to look. Slowly, she opened them, expecting to see something magical. But her heart sank. Her hair had turned a soft strawberry blonde. "What? This wasn't even mentioned," she muttered angrily. Confused and frustrated, Maya grabbed a hoodie and covered her hair. "No one can see this," she thought, as she rummaged through the bathroom, searching for blonde hair dye. Locking herself in her room, Maya dyed her hair blonde, determined to keep her secret safe. The next morning, she went to school pretending everything was fine, but As she walked through the hallways, she heard an announcement echo from the loudspeakers. Students, we will be conducting a hair color check today. Panic surged through Maya. Oh no, she whispered. Without thinking, she bolted out of the school, running as fast as her legs could carry her. She didn't stop until she was home. But when she opened the door, her mom stood there, her hair now a shocking red. Maya froze, her mind racing. Something was wrong. Maya, it's time. You know the secret now. And for that, you have to go, her mom said coldly, pulling out a gun. Maya's blood ran cold, sweat dripping down her face. No, this can't be real, Maya screamed. Suddenly, everything faded. She heard a voice calling her back. Maya, honey, wake up, her mom said softly. Maya's eyes shot open. She was in bed, her mom standing over her with a worried expression. Mom, Maya said breathlessly. You were having a nightmare, sweetie. It's all right now. Happy birthday again. Splash some water on your face. It'll make you feel better, her mom reassured her with a smile. Maya sighed with relief, realizing it had all been a dream. But as she slowly got out of bed and looked in the mirror, her heart skipped a beat. Her reflection stared back, her hair glowing with a strange purple hue, as if struck by lightning. What did it all mean? Elma! I stared out the window as lightning split the sky, striking the old oak tree on the edge of the field. The crackling sound of the storm was a reminder. Tonight was not the night to wander in the woods. They weren't haunted, despite what Eddie kept saying. He was always full of tales, especially when Jason egged him on. Elma, they'd call her, like it was some kind of legend everyone should know about. Supposedly, she ran an orphanage in the woods where she'd boil the children alive and bathe in their blood. According to Eddie, when the villagers found out, they burned her at the stake, and if you listened close enough, you could still hear her screams. It was all just nonsense. I glanced to the side, and there he was. Eddie, trudging through the mud, his hoodie pulled tight over his head. His sneakers were soaked, his jeans splattered with dirt. Come on, Nate, let's get going. Eddie called out as he banged on the front door. 1 sec, I'm looking for my boots. I'm not going out there in these new sneakers, I shouted back, annoyed. Where had I left them? Mom, I yelled toward the stairs. I'm heading out. Be back by 9, she hollered, her voice trailing down the hall. I'm 16, not 6, I mumbled under my breath, slamming the door on my way out. Eddie smirked when I met him at the gate, eyes gleaming with mischief. We need to meet Jason at the old mill by 6. You know he's not patient. I rolled my eyes but hurried along, pulling on my hoodie as we made our way through the village streets. We reached the nature reserve just as the sun began to set. The entrance gate creaked open with a gust of wind. A flickering street lamp cast eerie shadows on a flyer taped to the post. Wait a sec, Eddie, I said, squinting at the flyer. Is that Toby? That's the dog from next door. I didn't know he went missing. Eddie shrugged, uninterested. It's just a dog, Nate. But shut up and move, a voice came from behind us. Jason appeared, his face partially hidden under a baseball cap, a cigarette hanging from his mouth. Eddie fumbled in his pocket and tossed Jason a pack. Here's the smokes you wanted. Jason didn't even thank him, just took them and motioned for us to follow. His voice had a strange edge to it, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. The last bit of daylight faded as we trekked deeper into the woods. Eddie, usually the loud one, was unusually quiet. I caught him glancing nervously at the trees, his freckles standing out on his pale face. We're close, Jason grunted, pushing aside some low-hanging branches. You go first, Nate. I hesitated, the wind picking up around us. Why me? Afraid of the witch? Jason teased, his tone mocking. I knew better than to argue. I stepped forward, feeling the crunch of leaves underfoot, my heart pounding louder than I cared to admit. Somewhere ahead, I could hear the rush of the river. Suddenly, a strange smell hit me, a mix of burnt wood and something rotten. Do you guys smell that? I asked, turning back to them. Yes, smoke, Jason replied casually. As we moved closer, the smell intensified. It was nauseating, like meat left to spoil in the sun. My stomach churned. Then, just beyond the trees, I saw it, a small clearing with the remnants of a fire. The gray ashes scattered in the wind, the scent of something foul lingering in the air. My hands began to tremble as I realized how real this was. Eddie looked even worse, wide-eyed and shivering. What's that over there? Eddie's voice shook as he pointed. Before I could respond, something hard slammed into my back. I hit the ground with a thud, pain radiating from my face as I spat mud out of my mouth. Adrenaline surged as I pushed myself up, wiping my face with shaky hands. "We didn't mean to," someone muttered behind me, but their voice was distant, like a fading echo. I looked around, but Eddie and Jason were gone. The only light came from the smoldering fire. Panic set in. I started crawling forward, my left arm throbbing from the fall. That's when I saw it, a filthy, tattered blanket lying in the mud, stained with something dark. A wave of nausea hit me as the rancid smell intensified. I gagged, covering my nose, but curiosity or fear drove me to reach out with my good hand. As I pulled the blanket back, a swarm of flies erupted into the air, and my stomach lurched. I vomited onto the ground, the taste of bile mixing with the smell of decay. I forced myself to look. Beneath the blanket lay a limp, mangled form. My eyes blurred with tears, but in the dim light I could make out the collar around its neck. It read, "Toby." My breath caught in my throat. "Toby?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Before I could process what I was seeing, a shadow loomed over me. I looked up to see a figure standing in the dark, eyes black as night, a sickening grin spread across their face. "It's just a dog, Nate," the figure hissed, their voice dripping with malice. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't just some stupid legend. Elma's woods held darker secrets than I could have ever imagined. And we had just stumbled into one of them. The Banshee. I had just settled into the kitchen to make my morning coffee when I heard the rumble of a truck passing by. I glanced up from the counter, curious, and walked to the window. But there was nothing. No truck. No tire tracks. No sound but the soft hum of the early morning, just the mist rising from the dirt road that cut through the forest, disappearing into the trees. "Okay. Weird," I muttered under my breath before shrugging it off and going back to my coffee. Later, I went upstairs to wake my wife, Julia. She was still in bed, but something was off. The blankets, usually piled high because she loved sleeping with at least 3, were all on the floor, every single one. I furrowed my brow, thinking she must have had a restless night, and nudged her gently. "Morning, Hon," I said. "Time to get up." Julia groaned, stretching before sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Already?" "Ah!" She moved through her usual morning routine, brushing her hair, putting on a light layer of makeup, and sipping her coffee before heading out the door. Just as she was about to leave for work, she turned and asked, "Hey, can we visit my mom later? Maybe tonight?" "Sure, why not?" I said. "When you get home?" "Great." She smiled, then walked to her car. I watched her pull out of the driveway, but halfway down the road, her car came to a sudden stop. Confused, I grabbed my jacket and rushed outside. "What happened?" I asked, walking up to her window. Her face was pale. I thought I saw someone standing in the road, right there." She pointed to an empty spot a few feet ahead. It looked like a person, but when I stopped, they were just gone. I glanced around. The road was empty. No sign of anyone. "There's no one here, Jules?" I said gently. "Probably just the fog playing tricks on your eyes. Just keep driving. Call me when you get to work, all right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, I'll see you later." I watched her car disappear into the mist, shaking my head as I turned back toward the house. I was convinced it was nothing, just a trick of the light or fog. As I walked back, I paused for a moment, feeling like someone was watching me. I turned around quickly, but there was nothing behind me. Just the front of the house and our bright red door. Shaking off the eerie feeling, I muttered a few choice words and went inside. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Julia calling to let me know she'd made it to work safely, but then she dropped something strange into the conversation. "I'm pretty sure I saw a Banshee," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "I read about them once. You should let people know." "A Banshee?" I laughed, though a small chill crept up my spine. "Come on, Jules." "I'm serious, Nate. Call people. Tell them. Banshees are an omen, you know?" I sighed but promised I would. I called a few people, my brother, a couple of friends, and even my dad. They all said the same thing. "If you've seen or heard a Banshee, it means someone's going to die." I scoffed. "You're all crazy," I muttered, hanging up with frustration after each call. But after the last one, I felt something, a strange heaviness settling over me. My chest tightened and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I couldn't shake it, even as I sat down to watch TV, trying to distract myself. That's when I heard it. The wail. Low at first, like the distant cry of an animal, but it grew louder, more piercing. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, an eerie, otherworldly sound that echoed through the house. I sat there, frozen, unable to move as the wailing went on for what felt like hours. I didn't know if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. When Julia finally came home, I didn't mention it. We got in the car and drove to her mom's house like everything was normal. We spent the evening laughing, swapping stories, and catching up. It felt good to forget about the strange things that had happened earlier. But then, in the middle of telling a story, I heard it again, a scream. This time it wasn't distant. It was close, too close. I remembered what everyone had told me. If you feel sadness after hearing the Banshee's wail, it's not you who's in danger. But if you don't, it means someone else is. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked around the room. Julia was laughing with her mom, unaware. But deep down, I knew the scream I had heard wasn't a warning for me. Someone else was in danger. In the Ghost Manor. Years ago, in the remote countryside of Ireland, there stood an old, decrepit mansion known as Cruestv Manor. The owners, Thomas Bray and his son Evan, had perished in a tragic accident decades ago, leaving the estate abandoned. No one dared buy it again, not because of its dilapidated state, with its crumbling walls, sagging roof, and faded stone facade, but because of the strange happenings surrounding it. During violent thunderstorms, the mansion's windows would glow as if lit by some unseen hand, even though no one had lived there for years. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the manor. Some claimed to have seen a shadowy figure standing by the windows late at night, a presence they swore was too real to be a mere illusion. Still, no one had the courage to investigate, except for a man named William Dempsey. A thrill-seeker by nature, William was fascinated by the idea of uncovering the secrets of Cruestv Manor. He confided his plan to his skeptical friend Mark, who laughed it off at first. "You're crazy," Mark said, shaking his head. "That place is a death trap. People say it's cursed." But William, persistent as always, eventually convinced Mark to join him. They made a pact to wait for the next big storm, when the ghostly lights were said to appear. And so, after weeks of anticipation, a Friday night arrived with a fierce storm, thunder crashing, lightning streaking the sky, and winds howling through the trees. It was the perfect night. William and Mark arrived at the gates of Cruestv Manor, pushing open the rusted iron bars with a groan that echoed through the rain. Armed with nothing but an old lantern, they ventured inside. The air was damp and musty, the cobwebs brushing against their faces as they made their way through the dark entryway. The creaking floorboards beneath their feet groaned in protest with every step. They headed upstairs, hoping to find something, anything that would explain the strange lights. They entered the first bedroom, but it was empty, save for the howling wind rattling the cracked windows. Disappointed but not deterred, they decided to check the other rooms. As they walked down the long corridor, something changed. A presence, a feeling. And then, out of the corner of Mark's eye, he saw it, a figure, large and white, looming behind them. Without thinking, they bolted for the nearest door, hearts racing. But in his haste, William's foot slipped through a rotting floorboard, sending him crashing to the ground. The figure moved swiftly past them, its eerie glow visible in the dim light of the lantern. Gasping for breath, Mark managed to pull William free. "Wait a second," Mark panted. "Look at its feet!" "What?" William asked, struggling to stand. "It's wearing shoes." Confused, they gave chase, and Mark grabbed the figure by its long, flowing cloak. Yanking it off, they were both stunned to see not a ghost, but a man, alive and very human. He tried to run, but William tackled him to the ground. They tied the man's hands together with a piece of rope they'd brought and demanded answers. "My name's Peter Hudson," the man confessed, his voice shaky. "I'm a thief. I've been hiding here since I robbed the Galway National Bank." William and Mark exchanged glances. In Peter's bag, they found stacks of cash, hundreds of thousands of pounds in stolen money. Deciding they had enough evidence, they dragged him out of the mansion and marched him straight to the local police station, where the authorities were stunned by their discovery. Peter Hudson had been a wanted criminal for months, and thanks to William and Mark, he was finally caught. But as the excitement of their capture wore off, one question remained: who or what had been lighting the mansion's windows during the storms? Determined to find the truth, William and Mark returned to Willowcrest Manor the following night, their curiosity stronger than their fear. Armed with a stronger lantern this time, they explored the second floor. The wind whistled through the cracked windows, making the old portraits of the Bray family sway on their hooks. One picture in particular caught William's eye, a portrait of Thomas Bray and his son, Evan. As they made their way into one of the bedrooms, the atmosphere changed. It grew colder, and the flickering light of the lantern barely cut through the thick darkness. And then they saw him. A shadowy figure, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, stood near the window. His face was pale, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. The figure didn't move, but his presence filled the room with a chill. Suddenly, the lights flickered on. The shadow turned to face them. "Who are you?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. The figure stepped forward. "I am Thomas Bray," the ghostly apparition said, his voice like a distant echo. "I was betrayed by my friend Alexander, who coveted my wealth. He murdered me, but in the end, he too lost everything." Thomas Bray's spirit began to walk toward the door, fading as he moved. "This mansion has no master now," he said, his voice drifting away. "I remain, waiting for justice that will never come." As Thomas disappeared into the storm, William and Mark exchanged terrified glances. They had found their answer, but it wasn't one they wanted. Without a word, they ran, sprinting through the rain and mud, not stopping until they were safe in their homes. It was 3:30 in the morning by the time they collapsed into bed, exhausted and shaken. The following day, the news of their capture of Peter Hudson spread throughout the village, but the real story, the truth about Willowcrest Manor, was something they kept to themselves. From that night onward, locals swore they could hear Thomas Bray's ghost wandering the halls of Willowcrest Manor, his voice carried by the wind during every storm. His story, it seemed, would be told again and again until the end of time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.